Hey gang, welcome back to Joe Daddy's Garage. Today's video is part 6 in the 68 fastback build series under the Fangled playlist. Yes, what you see behind me is pretty much all dynacorn parts and my trailer jig underneath it that I built from a boat trailer. There are videos on that as well, and I've had a lot of people ask me about that. The trailer itself was just a regular boat trailer, and I bought that and I modified it to hold basically the chassis, let's say, or the Floorpan assembly and the frame rails of a 68, 69 Mustang. Now it'll fit other years, and I did not use any drawings for this. I used 2 original cars as a template. And when I built this trailer, I put the cars on my lift without the suspension under it, without anything in the way, and I lowered the body over the trailer, centered everything up, zeroed out so that everything was on the same plane, and then I built brackets that went up to the floor pan of the original cars, and I test fitted it with 2 cars, and it fits like it's supposed to. Now let's move forward. As I'm doing this assembly, and in the previous video I did a quick mock-up assembly of the back half of this car, I also did some detailed instruction on the front section with the firewall and the torque boxes and how to make those things interact with each other. When I was in the military and I went through basic training, we were taught how to do certain things, certain tasks, right? And there was a phrase that they used, and it was sequence is scored. And the reason they did that was there were different ways to do different tasks, like disassembly of a weapon, reassembly of a weapon, different things like that. But they wanted you to do it the military way, the way that you were taught. So when I say sequence is scored, that's related to that expression of that time period. But what I refer to when I say sequence is scored is when you're assembling stuff like this. And as I always say, test fit, test fit, test fit. But there's also a method to the madness. And I'm going to go over some of those details so that you don't get caught up in the problems that could arise from that. So I have been putting in various parts. On the opposite side, I have test fitted the rain gutter. I have also set in the rear panel in the back there. And I've been massaging the quarters and the wheel houses. And when I do that, I'm not like bashing them with a hammer. I am moving things, adjusting clamps, adjusting here, adjusting there, pushing different things like that, so that the panel kind of works its way into place. It takes a lot of experience and time to understand what metal does whenever you manipulate it. And I have a lot of that, and a lot of patience too. So let me show you what I'm talking about with the sequence is scored process. Oh, and before I get too far along, I need more clamps. So I've been working on getting this mating flange here for the quarter to fit the B-pillar, and it's very close to where it needs to be at the moment. I have a clamp down here, I have a clamp there, I have clamps everywhere, but I'm very happy with what's going on right now with this. So this deck filler panel, I mentioned in the previous video, it's going to sit over top of this outer portion of the quarter. There's no other way to make that happen from what I can tell. I've looked at it a couple different ways, and I thought, well, the width here tells me that it has to fit inside of this, because if you didn't, it would be spread apart and cause problems underneath. So I'm going to run with that. I'm going to do some more research on it, but I'm pretty happy with that thought process. It makes sense to me to go that route. So I also had spread apart the overlap here so that it sat over this piece. Now, there's still adjustment to go here. I got a little bit of a gap, but it's fine. It's where things are right at the moment. On this side, I took out the inner wheelhouse because I wanted to make sure there was nothing fighting the movement of the quarter panel and the outer wheelhouse. Sometimes they may be made a little different. Sometimes you run into problems down here where this radius may not be the same as your wheelhouse. So when you try to push the wheelhouse over, if it can't move, you have to do something. And I've modified these before. I've taken and cut just a strip of metal right here, pushed this over a little bit, made room for the wheelhouse to fit, And once that fits, everything else can come over and tighten this up. So just keep that in mind as you're doing this. Also, this piece, this back support, I don't know, whatever it's called. I got the name on the box over there. This supports your hinges, which mount here. It also supports your back seat, and it attaches to the inner wheelhouse. Now, when I was looking at this, I was a little confused as to how it actually fit in there. And I'm going to take these clamps off in a second and show you more about that. So right now I have it clamped up here on top with these. I have a gap on that side, and I'm going to detail that in just a minute. But I want to show you something else. I have fitted up the rain gutter just to see what it would look like. And at this point, it's fitting pretty well. There are limitations. Like this, I've seen this fairly wide on original cars as well. And the reason it probably will end up being wide, and it's not gonna matter, I'm just pointing this out, is the fact that the rain gutter itself has a mating surface here. So when this gets pushed over, it can only go that far without some sort of modification. And it is tight up against the inside of the roof. I have a little bit of a gap back here. I'm still adjusting some of that, but I wanted to point this out in the front. I also have it clamped here on the curve of the quarter panel. And as I was doing this, I realized that this part of the quarter panel is going to mate against the inside of the inner structure. And I was assuming, as I should assume in this case, that there would be welds here. There would be no reason why you wouldn't have these connected. You wouldn't have these floating against each other. So there's going to be some welds there. I have that one clamped as well, and all that is working out just fine. Let me pull off this part so I can show you more details. Okay, that's off. I'm going to set that down inside. Now, there's a flange here that mates to the inside of this part of the quarter panel. There's also this inner flange and this part of this structure, this back seat brace, and there's also a flange here. So whenever I'm looking at this, I have to figure out, well, how do I make all this interact? And I'm still deciding on that. The reason I have to decide on that is because when you come over here, you'll see on the quarter panel you have this piece sticking out. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, where does that go? What does that do? Because if it's on top, it actually interferes with this moving up. So this can't come up with that there. So I put it on the underside on that side over there. So it's underneath. And then you look and see that flange goes behind that part of the inner structure. So this is where I was talking about the sequence thing. If you were to put all this together and not have this part in place, you're going to run into problems. You have to be able to make this piece fit as you're fitting in the side pieces and almost before you put all this top stuff on. So just keep that in mind when you're doing this and look at how these pieces interact with each other. So right now I can't put this in the way that I want because I have everything clamped up. And I can adjust that later. I'm going to make sure that that piece there fits underneath or behind that inner structure. And I have to do the same thing on this side. So again, here is this little flange here that goes on the back side of this part of the quarter, and I can't make this go up right now because it needs to be on top of that hook. At least from what I'm seeing. I don't know any other way to do it, but that's what I'm seeing at the moment. So with all these pieces clamped into place, this has been working out really nice. The quarters have been getting much closer to where they need to be here on the front. I have a slight issue with this wheelhouse, and I think I know why. I'm going to show you that too. The flange, right now I have the wheelhouse flange on the inside
of the inner structure. And if I try to pull the wheelhouse out, like out away from this, it's fighting with that flange. I know it's hard to show you this, but if I pull on this wheelhouse to try to bump it over a little bit, that flange right there is fighting it. So I'll probably end up putting the wheelhouse flanges on the inside of the inner structure. So just little things like that that are gonna pay off later. I had the same situation over there. Maybe that one will show up a little bit better, and I can show you what I'm talking about. So again, I want to pull that wheelhouse out slightly. Get it in the camera, and in this case, you can see it moving over, but it needs to come over some more. So if I put it on the other side, that'll allow that piece to move. So just some details that you need to know. I'm going to continue with my adjustments and test fitting and all that sort of thing. I have a lot of holes to drill before I do any final fitment, and I may end up having to go to Harbor Freight and getting some more clamps. I have a few left on my welding cart over here, and then that may be enough, but I like these little ones with the pincher jaws like these right here. Just makes it easier to clamp things together. So more to come on this. I'll show you as I make progress. Alright, so I talked about making adjustments and making panels fit and different things like that, and I did remove the roof and the quarter panel because I want to take the side of the car back off, and before I do that I need to add some bracing. So let's talk about that. So with the side of the car off, the quarter panel and the roof and all that stuff, this exposes again the full side of the car. And I say full side of the car even though it doesn't have the wheelhouse in it. Now remember, whenever these come from dynacorn, they come with the wheelhouses just screwed into place and are not in the exact location. Now this is a little bit different than the Cobra Jet. This structure is not, there's not as much structure, let's say, as there is in the other car that I did. And I had put the bracing in here before, and the effort is to keep this door opening correct. So what I will do is weld in a piece of 1-inch square tubing down here towards the bottom, and that'll maintain the length that I want. And then once I have that done, I will take this panel back off and remove that rocker panel. And I know everybody says, hey, keep that rocker panel. I want to keep the original rocker panel. The design here is a little different, as I mentioned previously, and I just like the originals better. So we will look at that once I get everything back in place. But for now, I want to get this side off of the car. And also, I have already marked where this had lined up. So I have that reference just in case whenever I'm doing this as I put this together. Now I also will point out that I don't do or won't do any welding or anything until I've done all the fitment. So I'll make sure the doors line up and the fenders line up, and that'll help me verify again this length, even though I'm pretty confident with everything where it is. Same way with the roof. The roof dictates the shape, so not too worried about that. So the stands are positioned underneath this, and they're supporting here at the B pillar, up at the A pillar, up here at the top of the roof rail or A pillar upper section, and I think it's also making contact back there. So I feel pretty good about how this is sitting on here. And what I'll show you is maybe there's one spot weld right there, there's one or two here, and then 1, 2, 3, and that's all that's holding the B pillar to this section of the rocker panel. And then here we have one up on top, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, I don't remember if there was any behind here. If there are, I'll be able to get to them from this side. So what I want to start with is just taking a drill, and I don't intend to drill through the rocker panel really. I take a pretty thick drill bit, and you've seen it before. I'm not even sure if this is the one I'll use or not. And what I end up doing is drilling and kind of wobbling this around to weaken the weld. So do that, and same thing down here, all through this. These, well, it's not gonna, I'll do the same thing, even though I already know I'll have to make these holes big enough for the plug welds. I still don't want to drill through this panel unless I have to, but for now, that's the plan, and I'm going to get this apart. So I started drilling, and as I demonstrated, wobbled the bit and tried to make the hole bigger without going through the rocker panel itself. So I continued to do that on the kick panel, and then of course on the A-pillar, and then I came back to the B-pillar and did the same thing. And then I started using the panel separator, and I was able to get the forward section on the kick panel to come loose pretty easily. It took a little more effort on the A-pillar, and I had made a screwdriver just for this purpose, ground it down so that I could get underneath it a little easier. And let me point out that this metal is very soft. I mean, it moves really easily, and once you start moving it, it looks like it's going to be bad, but it really doesn't matter. It bends right back into shape. So I just continued using the screwdriver that I flattened down to try to get these welds loose. The top one there wasn't cooperating, so I ended up taking the drill and enlarging the hole just a little more, and then I came back with a screwdriver, and it popped loose pretty easily. Now I just went back and forth trying to get this section to come loose, and eventually you can see the rocker panel actually starts tilting a little bit. It did break loose, but it wasn't completely loose. So just try, you can see it flexing there. So then I decided to go to the B pillar and do the same process. Drill through just enough to weaken up the welds, and this worked pretty well. The one in the back, I was able to get to the first one pretty easily, and then the second one, it was at a bit of an angle, so I just kind of had to hang on to the drill. And then the body panel tool there, the separating tool, came, you know, it always does a good job, but you can't get it into every space. So I used the screwdriver again and managed to pop all of this loose. And it, you know, it just takes some time. You don't get in a big hurry and mangle the metal. And of course, this metal is, like I said before, it's pretty soft. It's pretty malleable, and you can massage it back into place. So once I got this part of it loose, I went on and loosened the front. Now, I will comment here that I reenacted that to some aspect because the camera wasn't on when it came completely loose. So here I just used a hammer and dolly and flattened this area back out. And again, the metal just moves very easily. Stepped up the holes so that they would be ready to drill. And then I did sand the backside later on to make sure they were smooth. Hammer and dolly the B-pillar, make sure all that's ready to go. And other than that, that's really all I had to do. You know, the metal moves really easily, and you know, being new and not being any kind of hardness to it, it's really simple to bend back into place. So, all right, here we have the lack of rocker panel. And as I was saying earlier, this metal bends really easily. This is not, you know, it's not tempered steel. It's very malleable. The only conflict I had was this little spot in here where when that was welded, there's really no access to it because you can't drill through the rocker panel. So I used the body panel tool and just went right through it. It separated really easily. Got that loose and everything came off. And of course the back section, same thing. Reshaped it as much as I need to at this point, and I'm happy now that that is off. Also, I want to point out that, you know, if you look inside of these, that's all bare metal. That is not painted. They don't do anything to treat the inside of this. Whenever they assemble this, they just spray it with weld primer all over the place. And if we come over to the rocker panel, you can see there's even some surface rust. So this is just raw metal. There is no treatment here. So keep that in mind. You know, when they do this thing, they build it and then they spray it with weld primer. They don't put any weld primer on it and then assemble it. You know, I don't think they want you to know that, but that's all bare metal, and that's all bare metal. So I don't know if it really matters. You know, these cars I talked about before, they're not going to be out in the weather. They're not driven in salt and snow and all that sort of thing, but it's just one of those observations. Okay, the other thing I did, I set up the original rocker panel, and I did notice, I talked about it before, there's a notch system, and basically the notch is there, but it's on the inner panel. It's not on, or I should say the center rocker. It's not on the inner rocker. So it's hard to see it because it's blocking it. But that's where the notch is. So that lines up nice. Now, I also have set in the outer wheelhouse just to see how well it fit. And of course it does fit better than the other one, or the compared to the dynacorn rocker panel. I've already treated this with rust inhibitor, and this will all get coated before I actually put it on. I also stripped it down with the surface conditioning tool, removed all the paint that was on there, and that revealed, at least on the driver's side, that there was the original paint, and I found one coat of the red. And on the passenger side, I found the original paint and two different colors of red. So I know this car's been hit before. Like I said, you know, the original car was hit several times and messed up. So we're going to move forward, and like I said, I'll treat this stuff before I weld anything on, but I'm liking where we're at. Things looking pretty good. Alright, so I want to show you some more things that I have going on. As I mentioned, I did clean out the inside of this, and I treated the rusted areas with the rust inhibitor or rust remover, and then I painted this with the chassis saver. So the inside of this is coated, and I don't need to do anything to the inside of, or the outside, let's say, of the center rocker panel. Now I'm going to fit this on there and show you some more details about the wheelhouses and some situations that may need to be addressed. As I pointed out, there is a notch right here on this center plate, and there's a notch right here that coincides with the notches on the original panel as well. So I just want to line those up for now, make sure they're on the corners of each other the way it feels right, and just clamp this in place. And then we're going to look at the back section where the wheelhouse interacts with the rocker panel. As you'll see, this angle right here matches this angle on the center plate. And you also see there's some material that accumulates. So you have this flange folded over on the inner rocker panel. Actually, this is the flange for the center piece, I should say, and then this is the inner rocker panel. And this adds up material. So in this case, I've got a little bit of a corner right here that is sticking out, and then this thickness is added to this thickness. And what you end up with, I'm going to show you with the inner rocker panel, if I can get it in place, is how that kind of compounds things. So when I put this in, what you end up with is kind of a push off, like that inner piece is pushing away at the wheelhouse, okay? And then you have a gap there, which is normal, that's not a big concern. But you also end up with spacing here between the flange of the wheelhouse and the rocker panel. And it's tight up against the inside there, and in the back it is mostly against pretty well. There's a little bit of a gap right here, and then this corner is not over. Like you see, it's sticking away from the drop-off panel. I'm going to set a complete wheelhouse assembly in so you can see what effect that has. It won't go in. Let me show you why that's a problem. And this is why I bought this complete assembly. I wanted to see if there were any variables in the design. And it looks like obviously they wouldn't remake different panels for this purpose. So now with that in place and sitting down in the pocket in the rocker panel, and of course interacting with the rest of it, you can see there's some contact here, and then there's contact there with that little flange. So what I'm thinking, because I have not test fitted the quarter panel with this assembly, but I can already say that it's in the wrong spot, because it needs to go forward for this to drop in, and it's hitting in this radius right here. And I ran into some of this with the Cobra Jet as well, and I think what I'm going to do is modify that flange. I'm going to bring it forward to give some more room, and may even let the rocker panel come forward just a tiny bit to allow for this contact to go away. So I'm going to readjust that, and we'll take another look at it. So I'm going to let the rocker panel come forward just a little, open up that space, and you can see there it dropped in. So this alignment changed to how that panel set down in there. It allowed for a little bit more room, but not enough to bring this all the way down. And it's even making more contact with that inner flange. So, take that out of the way. Now that's a lot closer. I say a lot closer. A lot is relative. It's closer to fitting correctly, but it's still not wanting to drop in the back. And if I remember correctly, what I did on the Cobra Jet was I had trimmed that radius. But I was also dealing with the mini tub situation, so I had to change it anyway. I also ran into this situation with another one of these that I did a while back. I don't remember which one, where I had to kind of reshape this. Now I would rather reshape this piece than to mess with the wheelhouse. I want to leave that intact. So right now that's not too bad, and I do plan to make a relief in here to move that up front. We can see that is much better fit wise, and that's as far as it's going to go. So that's where we're at. I know that this basically is ready to weld back in, but I'm going to play with this area a little more and try to get this to sit down in there correctly. Along with that, I'll test fit the other inner wheelhouse assembly or piece and see how that goes. But for now, I'll end up basically, if I get a Sharpie in here somewhere. No. That's not cool. First time I've ever dropped this camera. Still clicking, still blinking, so it must be working. Okay. So what I want to do is kind of make a reference of what I want to open up. I know my camera angle's not helping, right? and come back into it like that. I'll cut that line and then trim away any material that needs to be trimmed so that that piece can collapse over and make room for the wheelhouse. Now, as I mentioned before, I was going to cut this, and I have this Zizwheel tool that pretty much is the only tool I use for this purpose. And the thing is, you know, air tools get tired, they get worn out, and I've had this tool for years. So I started making the grooves, and I realized it wasn't doing a very good job, and then I remembered that I had this little air saw, and that really made a huge difference. I mean, it just cut right through. Now, of course, there was a groove already started, so, you know, part of the work was done. And here I just manipulated the metal to go underneath that flange, and then as I was fitting the wheelhouse into place, I realized the corner was giving me trouble. So I just took a sanding disc and knocked that corner down. I didn't really think about that initially, but once I did that, it moved right into place, and I think this is the way to go whenever you're trying to do this. So you can see here what I've done is push this down and behind. That's not the way I'm going to leave it. I only did that so that I could get an idea of how this was going to fit. And then I trimmed off that little corner, and now with the one-piece panel assembly, let's say, this thing is fitting very nice. I can also make adjustments if necessary, like I can move that, I don't need to, but if I were to move that flange further back, I still could, and kind of keep the shape. But at this point, this is pretty close to where, almost exactly where it needs to be. So I'll just clamp it in to the drop-off panel, and now what I will end up doing, I'm not going to leave that little piece hanging out underneath. I'll trim it down, cut off the excess, bring that flange back up, and make it make contact with the drop-off panel and weld it back in. Simple enough, but it's going to be very effective. Now I want to take and try the other wheelhouse. I want to see what happens with the loose piece that I have, just to get an idea. Now this only clamps to the outer, so you can't do that same thing necessarily with the other inner piece. So here is the other inner, and this, look at that. Look at that. What I can do though is clamp it to the inner flange. I should be able to do it up right here. Get it up into position. And there we go. That is what it's supposed to look like. You can do it. Follow these steps. Let me show you where it's at now. As I demonstrated with the cuts, and I came back and trimmed out that material. I have not welded it yet, and I'm just showing you now how much better this fits. Also, if you look at the side, you can see the line follows the floor pan or the frame rail, so the gap here is consistent, whereas on this side it is quite a bit different. And also up front, I just took the hammer and tapped this back a little bit right there, and this in just a little right there. You still have gaps, but that's normal. You're going to get that filled up with seam sealer. I've also traced out this perimeter, and the reason for that, there's a couple ways you can approach this. You could weld this on the edge if you wanted to, or you could back drill, knowing that where this is now, I can take this off and drill back through this panel, same way down here. So different approaches you can use. This line denotes the flange on the rocker, so I will definitely drill holes through this panel to make it weldable here. I also drew lines here, and these match up to that inner flange that I talked about earlier. So that's a contact point, and then I marked where I want to put some welds in the rocker panel. This fits pretty decent. I mean, there's a little bit of a contact right there, but it's not hindering it at all. The spacing back here is decent, and I don't expect everything to be perfect, but this is pretty close to where I want it. I'm still undecided as to whether I'm actually going to use this assembly. I'd like to use this assembly because it's already done, it's already together, but I'm going to have to weld up that back flange, and I will probably weld on this rocker panel. Also point out that the notches again, I know you can't see it, but because of this plate, the inner rocker, but there's a notch, and the other notch is right there. So it's lined up where it's supposed to be. And the way, or the value in doing it this way, is I can control the placement of this rocker panel versus the rocker panel being on this assembly. So hope that makes sense. If I want to make adjustments, I can without causing problems, because the other rocker panel, it dead-ended into that flange, and so you would have to modify something there to make it move, and that may change stuff going backwards. So I'm going to get that corner welded up there, and I think I'm going to go ahead and weld this rocker panel on since it's ready to go. Now I've decided to weld up that flange. So I did 3 little tack welds to hold it in place, and I actually welded it a little bit to the wheelhouse. I had to kind of wiggle it to get it loose there. Now I just take my time and do short tack welds, and of course I time lapse this and then I skip through some of it, but I just go back and forth. Here I'm just knocking down the metal, trying to make it match a little better, and continue on doing tack welds. And I was able to run some longer lengths of weld into that area, and then once I did all that, I sanded it down and just smoothed it up. Now there's still a little bit of touch-up work to do on that, but it's pretty minor, and that'll be covered with seam sealer as well. So now the big part is welding up all of these plug welds on the side of the rocker panel, on the side of the car. And these plug welds, as I mentioned before, the number count from side to side is completely different. Like this side, if I remember correctly, had 39 spot welds on top and 39 on the bottom. And the other side had like 46 on top and 41 or something on the bottom. So whatever number they used as a reference, I don't know. I guess, you know, these guys on the assembly line back in the day were like, hey, it's this number. And if they got close to that, they were happy about it. So I did actually make some extra holes on this side to fill in the gaps. And it probably has 42 holes or 42 welds that I did. I don't know what the number is for sure. I didn't count them. But I know I added extra holes where it had gaps in between those certain areas. Now here, of course, I'm just welding underneath the rocker panel, moving the clamps along and taking my time. Make sure I hit all of these areas correctly and burn in a good weld onto all that. It takes time, but you know, for a good job, you have to do these sort of things. Well, the rocker panel is welded into place, and I'm very happy with that. I still have grinding to do. I'll knock down the top of those welds, smooth them up on the upper side and of course the bottom. And I reset the side of the car up on top of the rocker panel. And I'm just looking it over and seeing exactly what works and what doesn't. Now, I mentioned about putting in the complete wheelhouse, and I don't think I'm going to do that. The reason is, whenever you put that wheelhouse in, it's fixed, as in it's welded to, or they're welded to each other, and so you can't manipulate it. And when this panel showed up, I mentioned it before, there were a couple of screws that just held this in. And if you'll look, you'll see this is a screw hole on this panel. So when they put this on here, they don't index it. They just kind of put it in place and just run some screws into it. Not even close to where it needs to be. Now, I did set the inner in place, and it's flowing just like the one-piece assembly was, and I'm happy with that. However, I'm running into a conflict. And I've seen this. This is the same situation I have over there. This piece, it's probably made correctly. It may be even made dead on. I don't know for sure. But if you look, you'll follow this radius and it drops down right here. Now, when I put the outer wheelhouse up into place, I can get it in there. And it'll clamp into place and fit fine, but it's making contact right here. And what you run into with that is, if you are trying to push the wheelhouse up, you're fighting this piece, and you could be distorting this as well. So what I want to do is trim that down. It's not going to hurt anything. It makes no difference. I may just draw a line somewhere right about here and split that, so I can get rid of some of this excess as it looks to me, and that'll allow for more adjustment on the outer wheelhouse. Also, I have taken the outer wheelhouse and clamped it directly into the quarter panel. Now, I've shown this before. These, if you take these clamps off, you'll see this thing spring. And that's exactly what it'll do. So whenever you're trying to put this in place, you're going to be fighting this kind of torsional load on it. Now, it's not that extreme. I can squeeze this down with my fingers, but I'm just showing you some of the things you'll run into when it comes time to piece this together. So this right now is fitting pretty nice to the quarter panel. So I'll just clamp that down, and I can clamp this one on over here, and it's fine. It looks good, pretty good. It's got barely a contact point right there on this inner flange, which mates to the rocker panel. It fits real good in this pocket down here. You can see a little bit of conflict in this section, which again is pretty minor overall. And even this shape is, it's close. You can see how it tapers and gets wider. And maybe that's how they were. I don't know for sure. I'm just pointing that out because this is supposed to overlap that. And there's going to be some variables there. Other than that, I think it's working out pretty well. I will be doing more test fitting and adjusting. I do need to grind down the welds so that this piece fits more flush against the flange of the rocker panel. So I'll be continuing with that. And I'm probably not going to be doing any other welding, at least at this point. I want to make sure the cowl should be here tomorrow. So I want to make sure it fits in here the way it should. And I also want to, at some point, hang the doors on it and the fenders and see where everything lines up from that standpoint as well. I always try to test fit everything as many times as I can, and it pays off in the end. Now at this point, I'm cutting off that bit of extra metal, or at least what I consider to be extra metal. I don't like to have stuff interfering with, the pieces interfering with each other. And this may or may not have been necessary, but I just felt comfortable doing that and then fitting things into place and making that happen. Of course, I did mention that I would have had the flange on one side or the other, and I put it on the inside now because I realized that's probably the way it's supposed to go. And of course, this is just some cool shots of grinding and throwing sparks all over the place. It's a mess, but it's all part of the job, and you just have to do it. Now that I have the grinding done, I'll just show you this. As I was taking the grinder and going across, I was identifying any low spots or voids that I had in the welds, and I came back and touched those up a little and then hit them with the grinder again. So all that is taken care of. On the bottom side, I did a little bit of grinding, but then I decided I'll just put that off because it's not going to interfere with anything else that I'm doing at the moment. I also sprayed some paint up inside of these cavities here, so covered up the bare metal at the minimum. Do something. Just don't leave it the way it is. If you're going that far, I should say. Now, the other thing that I'm going to do, and I pointed this out before, and this bracket here, this added on, I don't know what you want to call it. It's a curved piece that is welded to the inner structure. And if you look at that side over there, and I mentioned this earlier, that was built that way as opposed to assembled. What I mean is, when they put this together, more than likely on the factory, that piece was not welded in first. It was likely put in separately, meaning you could put in the wheelhouse, adjust it however you needed it. You could bring the side in, adjust it, and then that piece would have been added later. At least that's my opinion. I don't see any reason how they could, or any reason why they would make that in a fixed location, knowing that it had a long leg on each end, or the whole thing really, that you can adjust. So seeing that gap on that side, and as I showed it on the other one, similar situation. So if you look, you can see a little bit of edge distance here, and then it gets tight up here. But you look from this side, and you have a great big flange. So it makes sense to me that they would have, in my opinion, put that in later. So what I plan to do, because I like to have things fit, I don't like to force stuff into place, I'm going to drill out these welds. Take this piece off, and then once I get everything fitted the way I like it, I'll put that piece back in and weld it back in place, and then it'll fit properly on the wheelhouse. So it's got these little humps here that are built into it, and those are already on the wheelhouse. Let me see if I can find that one. So the inner also has those humps. So hope that makes sense. I don't like to force stuff into place and put a stress load on something that shouldn't be there. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to drill those out, and then I'll get back to setting this side back in place and doing some more adjusting and fitting. So of course, another round of test fitting and mocking up. I just set it in place and used some clamps to hold it up there. I will be doing this over and over until I'm completely satisfied with how everything fits. So once that was done, I went to the back area and I used that wedge piece, or that angle piece, and fit it up into the wheelhouse area and made sure that it would fit like it's supposed to, and I'm pretty happy with how that looks. Alright, I have set the side back up in place. I've also put the cross pieces, the headers, front and rear, up into place, and things are looking pretty good. I know that there's still issues here and there, minor issues, but the overall fitment is coming in pretty well. I did set the deck filler piece up in, and now I've got a better angle here before. I think I showed this earlier where the gap was a little bit bigger on both sides, and these sides are going to come in even more. It doesn't take much to pull them over. Also, that piece, it's not clamped. It'll end up there, and so you can see now what I was talking about, the spacing difference. There's the paint witness mark of where it was. I also have lined out the wheelhouse so that I know where to drill holes, and of course that piece there that I trimmed down so that it wouldn't interfere with the movement of the outer wheelhouse. Still haven't done anything with the passenger side. I did fit the tail panel into place, and little issues like this right here. This metal is fighting the tail panel from sitting properly, and I may have to play with that. This side is not even close to being fully adjusted. This side is much closer. So you can see the metal comes around that corner better, and it overlaps here like it's supposed to. The holes are close to where they need to be, and there's still probably a little bit of adjustment left in that. Up here I clamped in the header, and this will come down. It won't be a big problem there. It's fitting the line here very well, the quarter panel to the inner structure. That's about it. Now I'm probably at a pause at this point. I was hoping to have the cowl show up today. It's not here yet. I did want to put that in, and also something I did earlier that still needs to be addressed, because as I've adjusted things, and I pointed this out with the firewall, when I made the cutouts for the torque boxes over in the corners, I pointed out that this little piece of metal here needed to be trimmed, and that is actually causing a slight problem right now, and I forgot to trim that off. So it's making contact, and what that's doing is it's pushing the firewall up slightly, and I need to trim that so that it can go down in. You can see a little bit of a gap right there, so it can go down and make contact. So little details like that can affect the whole big picture. So at this point, I think this is as far as I'm going to get for this video. I'm not in a hurry. I'm not going to rush these things. I just want to make sure everything is going to fit like it should before I do any of this type of welding up here. That is not going anywhere. Now, as I've demonstrated, there is a lot of work that is actually involved with this. I know I can make it look easy, and I don't want to make it seem like it is easy. There's a lot of things that can be a variable. And so when you're putting these panels together, never assume that they're going to fit perfect. None of these actually fit perfect. I have to do this and do that and push here and clamp there, and eventually they kind of settle into place. But as I've already demonstrated, there are things that I have to do to help them get to that point. So I don't want you to think that, hey, I can just go out and buy one of these and just put it together and be done with it. Now, you may be able to. It may happen. But you also run the risk of things that maybe you're not familiar with. And that's why I'm making these type of videos. You can see the process. There's nothing that I'm trying to hide. I'm trying to demonstrate everything that I'm doing so that you can fully understand the effort that goes into this. Now, I will probably put this together, take it apart, put it together, take it apart. My guess is 30, 40, 50 times. And I can tell you this, every time I do that, something will change. Nothing ever goes back in the same spot. I've had the same situation with just putting fenders on a car. You can bolt the fender on and it doesn't fit. You can stare at it, you can get frustrated with it, take it back off, put it on, and this time it's better. Take it off, put it on, and this time it might fit perfect. Or it might not. I've seen 10 different scenarios, and it doesn't make any sense in that you would think, hey, this is a piece of metal. It can't really do much. Metal can move. Now, not move like change shape and become some exotic other thing, but a tweak here and a push there and a grunt there can make a big difference. So keep that in mind if you're considering doing one of these. But, you know, hey, give it a shot if you want to. I've had people ask me for a list of materials or parts that I have used to make this happen. If I can put that together, I'll put it at the end of this so you can see all that, or I'll put it in the description down below so you can see that way. I'll see what I'm not guaranteeing that I'll put it together, but I'm working on it. So I am, as I said, I'm waiting for the cowl to show up. Hopefully it gets here the next day or so, and then I can do some more test fitting with that. I want to make sure everything's going to fit before I do, as I said, any serious welding on the structure. So at this point, I want to thank my patrons. As I said before, YouTube really doesn't care what I do. My patrons do. They want me to keep making videos, not only for them, but for other people out there who are trying to build these cars. So a special shout out to all of them. I thank them for their support so much. And if you're interested in becoming a patron, there is a link in the description below. As with all of my videos, there are links down below for Patreon, Amazon, I think Instagram, whatever. All that stuff is listed there, and if you follow those links, you too can be part of that society. So otherwise, thanks for watching, and until next time, take care of yourselves. See ya.